Did you know that two people with the same moon sign can experience emotions in completely different ways? One person may have grown up feeling deeply supported and emotionally understood, while another may struggle with feelings of rejection, restraint, or instability. Much of this can be seen through the aspects formed by the moon. Hey, I'm Adrienne the astrologer and welcome to my channel. In this video we'll explore the aspects formed between the moon and the planets in a natal chart, and basically we'll dive into what they can reveal about our emotional life, childhood experiences, relationships with caregivers, and even the ways we seek comfort and security. For those who are unfamiliar with aspects, they are simply the angular relationships formed between the planets in a natal chart. They describe how planetary energies interact with one another, whether they cooperate easily, create tension, or remain largely disconnected. Today, we'll focus exclusively on the five Ptolemaic aspects shown on this table. While the moon sign describes how we experience and express our emotions, the house placement shows where those emotional needs are most strongly lived out. The moon's aspects reveal what influences, shapes, and modifies our emotional life. Moon aspects frequently describe patterns of early conditioning that continue to operate throughout adulthood. They can tell us something about our experience of mothering and care, our instinctive reactions to life, and the kind of emotional themes that tend to repeat themselves in our relationships. A Moon Jupiter aspect, for example, may point towards experiences of warmth and generosity, whereas Moon Saturn contacts often speak of restraint, responsibility, or emotional distance. The planets aspecting the Moon also influence how we nurture others, how we prefer to receive comfort ourselves, and the emotional atmosphere we create within the home. Finally, because the moon is closely linked with bodily rhythms and instinctive responses, its aspects may sometimes become visible through postures, gestures, habitual movements, and our relationship with the body itself. With that in mind, let's begin with the aspects formed between the moon and the sun. The conjunction between the two luminaries could be described as follows: my emotions, feelings, and daily habits merge with my basic identity and conscious purpose. In practice, this means that there is no overall disparity between the needs and wants, resulting in a great clarity of purpose and direction. This individual stakes everything on a single throw, investing a concentrated amount of resources and efforts into a single venture. The sign and house in which this conjunction is found will describe this venture. As the sun represents the father and the moon the mother, this individual's parents likely played a unified role. However, in adulthood, this individual often struggles to identify with others due to this focus on one aspect of human life. They tend to be quite subjective and self focused, believing in their own authority. Sometimes unconscious processes pull the strings behind their actions, though. Their goal is often to influence the future by focusing on the past, by bringing it into consciousness and shedding light on what has happened before they were incarnated on this earthly plane. Additionally, they may appear androgynous at times, with their feminine and masculine sides well balanced or even merged. This can manifest as a woman who is decisive, goal oriented, and very much capable of standing up for herself. In this case, she has more traditionally masculine personality traits and likely identifies more with her father. Alternatively, this can manifest as a man who is traditionally feminine, sensitive, subjective, and with a moon like face. He likely identifies more with his mother. Regardless of the gender, the pull of the family can be strong, and they can have difficulty leaving the nest due to their strong identification with their home environment. However, as always, other chart factors must concur. A sextile, an easy aspect, could be described as my emotions, feelings, and daily habits productively combined with my identity and conscious purpose. While the trine, another one of the easy aspects, could be described as my emotions, feelings, and daily habits harmonize with my basic identity and conscious purpose. In practical terms, this usually means that they are comfortable with themselves and their life. They find it easy to speak their mind, to express themselves and their feelings. On the downside, though, they can be a bit too comfortable and unquestioning in terms of their character, as they are very self accepting. That is, of course, usually a good quality, but you know what they say about too much of a good thing. Moreover, everyone should work on themselves, without exception, which this type may find not very easy. However, an easy aspect between the sun and the moon does enable them to cope with more stressful elements of their life, which could be more distressing for more self conscious individuals. Their parental relationship was usually stable, and even if it wasn't, this aspect means that the parents presented a sort of united front to the child, where the child wasn't made to feel as if they needed to choose between the two parents. So, we could say that the parental relationship was harmonious in most cases, and there was a feeling of security and tranquility around the early life, if not disproven by other charge factors, of course. The opposition, which is a hard aspect, could be described as follows: my emotions, feelings, and daily habits oppose with my basic identity and conscious purpose. This opposition results in the individual becoming indecisive and unfocused, which contrasts with the conjunction type. They have a need for relationships as they can be used for self definition and clarification of goals. For instance, through communication with another, they get to know themselves. This need for relational mirroring, coupled with their inner imbalance or insecurity, can lead the person to look outside themselves to someone or something for emotional fulfillment. More positively, they are capable of objectivity and can hold the awareness of multitudes, which could not be said about the conjunction type. They are usually very aware of all the different possibilities within and without themselves, which can make the achievement of goals difficult, as they may be bogged down by all the ambiguities and thus lack the conviction to push through to success. In terms of the parental relationship, each of the parents was usually perceived as playing a completely different role. Perhaps one was always at home, taking care of the household, while the other was out in the world, chasing after worldly recognition and career success. The parents may or may not have been separated, nevertheless, the child felt stuck in the middle. Then, later in adulthood, the individual still finds themselves needing to integrate these two different people into their psyche. But similarly to the other sun moon aspects, they tend to be very sensitive. Lastly, the square, another hard aspect between the moon and the sun, could be described as my emotions, feelings, and daily habits produce stress and tension with my basic identity and conscious purpose. As you can see, the square will probably share many of the same problems with the opposition, but due to the dynamic tensions, they may even be even more restless. Emotional security doesn't come easy. They will usually have to work hard on gaining a semblance of who they truly are. There is usually a split between what the individual wants, as represented by the sun, and what the individual needs, as represented by the moon. Moreover, there is usually an inner conflict between wanting to adapt to their environment and doing their own thing. Sometimes, even if they are able to define their goals, their habitual behavior or unconscious patterns tend to get in the way. Sometimes it's even their familial or domestic situation that blocks their path from breaking free from the shackles of the past. In summary, the person's ability to be clear about what they desire and their ability to express it and go after it is challenged at every step. However, allowing the past to interfere with the future is only possible if it's allowed by the individual. All of this tension is ever more stressful because they do have a real need to achieve something in life, something they can be proud of. At times, it's to compensate for the fact that they didn't feel as if their parents were proud of them for their accomplishments when they were young. When talking about parental figures, the early family life is likely to have been quite difficult. The parents were seen in conflict, disposed to getting in each other's way, or maybe even each of the parents had a different idea of who the child was allowed to become, what activities they were allowed to partake in. Basically, they both put pressures on the child that were in odds with each other. This conflict oftentimes ended in a separation, which was probably not very peaceful, sometimes resulting in the individual choosing to opt out of parenthood altogether in the future. But as always, the challenge is to try to integrate all the seemingly conflicting needs and wants around personal goals, the past and the future, their identity and their family, as well as the conflicting parents in their psyche. On the upside, as the square aspect produces a lot of tension, they will be very motivated to resolve this conflict to gain some inner peace, and will likely achieve it if they put in the work, of course. Moon Mercury aspects. Let's begin with the building of our sentences based on each of the aspects for clarity, and then I'll continue with talking about the aspects in general. The moon is associated with your needs as well as the feeling of safety and nourishment, while Mercury represents the transferring of information. Therefore, the hard aspects usually symbolize problems in communication. When we tie this back to the mother, there may be difficulty in understanding between mother and child. This could happen if the individual's mother has a very different temperament from her child. Like, for instance, she is fiery while the child is earthy. The child may be trying to communicate that it needs to be held, but she doesn't pick up on that need, making the child feel insignificant, like it lacks something, like there's something wrong with it. This then becomes a part of their story, an early impression that may haunt them later on, and which can manifest as an insecurity around intelligence or the ability to communicate properly. The later consequences in relationships may be that they feel like their partner doesn't understand them, which may leave them feeling like they cannot openly express their needs and feelings to each other. Essentially, communication problems. The same problem that was with the mother is being repeated in later relationships. On the other hand, the easy aspects would represent good communicative abilities in the mother child relationship, usually. Moreover, in terms of the mother's personality, the Moon Mercury aspects can indicate a mother who is talkative, gossipy even, and may give us a clue that the mother's relationship with her siblings was significant, in a positive or negative manner depending on the type of aspect. Whatever the aspect, the native's communication will be influenced by feelings and emotions. At best, this can manifest in the mercurial skill of thinking, speaking, and reasoning being softened by the sympathetic and caring qualities of the moon, resulting in someone who can accommodate many different viewpoints and ideas, someone who is open and understanding of the other people's feelings, and is talented in communicating the different subtleties of the emotional realm. There will also be some good practical sense present and the ability to know what facts are actually useful to the conversation, which are not, and which are better supplemented by the emotional understanding and empathy. At worst, though, this individual's capacity to look at the facts will be distorted by feelings and emotional bias, which don't allow them to think objectively. Another issues may be around listening, especially because their habit of incessant talking can get in the way of remaining silent long enough to actually listen to, absorb, and understand what the other person is saying. By the way, the incessant talking doesn't necessarily have to be incessant talking, it can be incessant thinking, incessant chatter in the head. So, this can be a difficult person to have a factual and reasonable conversation with, especially if they suffer from the inability to focus. Whatever the case, this individual will be quite chatty and will usually have a wide friend group, or at least a group of acquaintances with whom they can chatter. I have read this is a good combination for talking about everyday matters and writing them down, as in, keeping a journal. I do believe it would be a good idea because this individual would probably find it useful to keep track of their feelings, especially in relation to how they change the way they think over time, as this type tends to change their mind quite a bit. The Moon and Mercury are both very changeable and fast, so if these planets are in contact, this ability would be heightened. Moreover, writing down their thoughts and the daily habits would be great for the development of imaginative writing. They could also have the talent for public speaking and understanding the public's thoughts, especially if the planets are in harmonious aspect. Moon Venus aspects. Again, let's build our sentences based on aspect for clarity, and then we shall continue with talking about the aspects in general. In this case, the hard aspects, the square and the opposition, would mean that the individual's need for security and emotional nurturance are at odds with what they find beautiful and attractive. There's an incompatibility in what these two planetary archetypes represent, and this conflict could play out in different ways. One common example in men is that they split their anima image, the feminine archetype, into two figures, which is also typically known as the Madonna whore complex. They get into relationships with women who represent the Madonna, someone they can see as pure, caring, maternal, or simply someone coming off differently to what they desire sexually. Then, to ease the internal conflict and dissatisfaction, they try to resolve it by having an affair on the side to satisfy their Venusian needs. Or, with women, a common example is that the woman gets married to someone who makes her feel safe and provides her with material security, but it's also someone who isn't really turning her on in a Venusian way. In terms of the mother child relationship, the mother could be seen as too exciting, as is seen in the case of the maternal and the erotic principle getting mixed up, which understandably produces problems in later life. For instance, the individual, usually a man, gets close to a woman they find attractive, but once they become familiar, he starts to feel awkward about doing the deed with her because now he gets to see her as maternal too, and there's that taboo. On the other hand, if the child was a girl, the mother may be seen as the one who is beautiful, thereby leaving the child feeling inadequate in comparison, perhaps even leading to some competition within the relationship or in her subsequent female friendships. Moreover, there can be an incompatibility between the two facets of the feminine principle for the woman too, a sense of not being able to find the balance between being maternal and erotic. They may align themselves with the lunar archetype, accepting the motherly role and not caring about their looks, or they may align with the Venusian archetype, being happy with being a girlfriend, a mistress, a flirt, never really going much further than that due to the inherent uncertainty about commitment in romantic relationships. With the hard aspects, the mother may not have been good at feeding the child's needs, or she was too good at it, depending on the child overall. This can be the mother who gave a lot of treats to her children, who may have spoiled them with love, food, or material items. The individual with this aspect is usually a social butterfly, and their mother is often too, although sometimes the mother was experienced to have given up on her social life to become a mother. But the situation could be also reversed, as in the case of the mother being seen as caring more about her social life than about caring for her child. In some cases, the child can perceive that it is not what the mother truly values or appreciates. On the other hand, sometimes the mother herself was experienced as someone who was needy for love, and the child was expected to provide that affection to her. Oftentimes, the mother never quite manages to let her children go, but turning away from the mother for a moment, much needed moment, the individual will, whatever the aspect, be quite soft and yielding in nature and willing to cooperate, especially loving of pleasure and material comfort. These people usually love to please and can be quite popular, diplomatic, naturally warm, friendly, charming, and hospitable. On the downside, they can be a bit too adaptable, a bit too easy to get hurt, frightened of confrontation and criticism, as sometimes they haven't experienced it at home. In childhood, they usually learned how to get what they wanted with their grace and charming manner, which will usually result in them not ever saying what they want directly, simply relying on their pleasing nature to have everything given to them. They certainly expect and want the easy life, but it is in their best interest to cultivate some Martian or masculine characteristics, such as the ability to assert themselves in a direct manner and the ability to hold their own in a confrontation, to stand up for what they believe in, and quite frankly, to also develop a backbone. And now we can turn to the Moon Mars aspects. There's a lot of inner anger with this aspect, especially with the conjunction or the hard aspects. In contrast to the Moon Venus type, these individuals are usually direct and authentic, as for them to feel is to act. They love to be involved, but they are very sensitive to threat, protective, and easily aroused, which can lead to some emotional volatility. There can even be childish aggressiveness and a tendency to explode at any moment. On the bright side, they possess a strong need to do, to roll up their sleeves and get on with whatever they are emotionally or otherwise involved with. There is a lot of emotional action coupled with internal emotional conflict, as they usually find it difficult to integrate the need for a course of action and a need to feed themselves emotionally. The advice here is to integrate their need to assert themselves with their need to feel safe. But they are usually courageous, enterprising, and fearless, which at times acts to their benefit, at other times to their downfall, as they can react out of habit, not with purpose, making them harsh and reckless. Frequently, they will be very sensitive to discord, as these people often come from volatile families where the mother may have been feared to fly off the handle at any moment. Sometimes the mother is seen as competitive or quite masculine. Sometimes the mother was the victim of violence. Whatever the case, inevitably the issues of anger and mother go together. The childhood may have been experienced as one of battle, a battle between two strong willed individuals, the child wanting one thing, the mother another. As a baby, the individual did not have the verbal capacity to argue with their mother, but there may have been some frustration and anger, nonetheless. The baby feeling like, I want to be fed now, and the mother not wanting to do it at that moment for some reason. In later relationships, this aspect can manifest as fierce arguments. Maybe the mother was experienced as too bossy, domineering, intrusive, and that can be later projected onto the romantic partner. The individual wants to assert their independence, and the mother is somehow interfering. This type often feels like they never have enough space. However, there can also be an inner dilemma between wanting independence and adventure and being adventurous, and the other part of them craving closeness, safety, and security. But the ego hates ambivalence, so they may identify with one part of the aspect while projecting the other, living out their Mars side, being adventurous and independent, and projecting the moon, leading to the partner being seen as clinging onto them or holding them back. Or alternatively, living out their clingy side and projecting their Mars onto their partner then being seen as unavailable, doing their own thing, or being seen as volatile. Commonly, there is much activity on the domestic scene, and the home is not experienced as the typical lunar place where the individual returns to recharge the batteries, but the exact opposite, the place where the batteries run down in the first place. On a more positive note, this is a good aspect for any DIY projects, decorating, and any such activities that can be done around the home. This aspect can also be associated with fast food, for instance, eating on impulse or when angry, which can also make them prone to digestive upsets, so it's important to be mindful of that. Now, we can continue with Moon Jupiter aspects. With such an expansive aspect, these people are usually friendly and sympathetic. They are sensitive to their environment, which they want to understand as deeply as possible. I don't know if you've read The Secret History by Donna Tartt, but this aspect reminds me of one of the characters in the novel, Bunny Corcoran. It's someone who responds in broad terms with a tendency to make promises that can't possibly be kept, always making exaggerated gestures, optimistic, self indulgent, easygoing, with a good natured character. People with a hard aspect between these two planets, however, tends to blow banal things out of proportion. Sentimentality and generosity are a part of their repertoire, moderation and responsibility are not, though. They tend to rely on their good luck a bit too much and can be quite greedy in emotional and material terms anyway. Love to teach and to preach with a penchant for the dramatic and the grand. They love to think they're greater than life. Moreover, they can indulge in extreme eating habits and are usually restless. So, a word of caution if you have this aspect, avoid overindulgence in food and substances, as they may be detrimental to your body. Whatever the type of aspect, most of them will feel at home among other cultures or while living abroad. This aspect also often indicates good relationships with women, unless disproven by other chart factors. They can also be quite religious, spiritual, or into realms such as politics, economics, and philosophy. And they usually possess an innate faith in life, being both optimistic and philosophical, so they usually possess the ability to see the big picture when anything goes wrong in their life. Basically, their faith is such that it can move mountains. They remain hopeful no matter how dismal the situation they find themselves in is, and are always striving to grow and be better than they were before. Moreover, they are quite capable of elevating another person's spiritual consciousness. In fact, they may sometimes feel that it is their moral obligation. As the moon is associated with emotion and Jupiter is the planet of expansion, there can be a tendency to fling from one extreme to the other emotionally. Thus, in relationship to their mother issues can be exaggerated and dramatic. One minute the mother child relationship is full of love, the next it's full of despair, as if they were riding a roller coaster. The mother herself could have been viewed as dramatic, manic, or maybe she had an inner conflict between mothering and wanting to be out in the world, exploring and traveling, or she could have been really into religion or any other emotionally expansive practice. Whatever were her activities, she will have been viewed as Jupiterian. And thus, the individual, if the individual is attracted to women at least, will probably look for a romantic partner who is viewed as adventurous, inspirational, basically a woman who won't be boring in any way. Let's move on from the expansive territory into the constricting, aka Moon Saturn aspects. With such a difficult aspect, growing up was probably not easy. Of course, when talking about the hard aspects, especially, as well as the conjunction, mother was likely uptight, burdened with responsibilities, perhaps even insecure about whether she was doing a good job as a mother. Moreover, the individual may have felt as if she couldn't meet their needs properly. Maybe she was too busy, maybe she was overwhelmed, but the child's needs weren't met, so it feels frustrated and insecure, as if there was something wrong with it. Early impressions cut deep, and if a child thinks they're unworthy of love and attention, they bring this insecurity into their later life and into all their future relationships. These people usually hold to the belief that others will fail to meet their needs, so they form relationships out of anxious attachment. And as such, they usually attract those from the opposite spectrum, aka the avoidants, who aren't able to respond to them in a way they need. They are unconsciously trying to turn the bad mother into a good one, which usually fails spectacularly. And thus, their worst fears usually become a reality, only if inflating their anxiety and insecurity and fulfilling their belief that others aren't able to meet their needs because they are too much. And that's how the mother probably felt too, that the child was too much responsibility, that it was overwhelming, and a vicious dynamic is set up that lasts lifetimes and even generations. Sometimes the child itself doesn't feel right about having needs, so they try to dismiss them and try to make up for their insecurity by being so very productive and to prove their value to the world. If they aren't being productive, they feel unworthy of love. Sometimes that comes out of a childhood conditioning where the child had to be achieving and self sufficient just to gain a speck of acknowledgement. Or they were shown that they would only be loved if they were unobtrusive and stay in the background. Then that's basically how they treat themselves in later life. They can never fully relax, they always have to be on guard and be responsible just to make up for their inner feeling of inadequacy. With this contact, it is important to grieve the ideal mothering that they never received and work through the psychological pain in order to heal. Their childhood wasn't warm or soft, but that doesn't mean their adult life can't be, after a long period of healing their childhood traumas at least. Their childhood was lonely, but that doesn't mean their adulthood has to be if they put in the work, as is typical for the Saturnian aspects and placements. As these people had to grow up early, whether they felt the pressure to be self sufficient or they had to take care of their younger siblings or even parent their parents, there will usually be a delay in emotional development. When you have to take on responsibility at too early an age, you don't get to truly experience being a child, which can result in the feeling of a trapped child within their personality. A man who blushes shyly when a woman talks to him, a woman who wears pigtails and ribbons in her hair. They have to learn how to feel and express their emotions all over again in adulthood, as well as to learn how to actually react in a way that is natural to them, as they tend to be overly cautious. Their greatest need is to feel safe, safe enough to actually discover what they feel, as they often get stuck within their emotional wall. Some may take the emotional realm very seriously and continue feeling the weight of responsibility well within all their relationships, and they may never let you down because they don't want to hurt anyone the way they've been hurt. Others find the emotional realm very scary, so they may never open up sufficiently to even receive the emotional feedback that they require. Whatever the case, they often end up with partners who are very much like their parents and feel awkward with the feminine aspect of themselves, whatever the gender. But through facing their femininity, through facing their fears of emotions, neediness, responsibility, and their very own insecurity, they can emotionally develop into adulthood. On the bright side, whether the aspect is harmonious or disharmonious, this is usually a great aspect for the management of time and money. They usually have the ability to be frugal with money as they are very responsible and very afraid of loss. Great, that's about as bright as it gets. Now, let's shake things up and move to Moon Uranus aspects. Uranus is unconventional. It's erratic, unstable, inconsistent, and individualistic. That's the way the individual with the Moon Uranus aspect may have experienced their childhood, their relationship with their mother, their emotional states, perhaps all three. They themselves usually behave in such a manner. Emotional cutouts from the mother or some sudden shock in childhood is often a part of their story. This child had to learn to be emotionally independent early on, and they would like to stay that way. They view feelings, love, and emotions as unstable, and because they may change at any moment, they're viewed as unsafe. Because these two planets represent very different, one could say opposing characteristics, the hard aspects may produce a closeness freedom dilemma. The moon wants to be emotionally close and included, while the Uranus wants its space. It wants its freedom. If the individual identifies with the freedom part of the polarity, their partner will usually be experienced as clingy. On the other hand, if the individual resonates more with their need for closeness, their partner will usually live out their need for autonomy for them. Then their partner may step out of the relationship in search of a freer existence. Overall, it's best to accept both needs and to unite these two opposing forces. As I said, in the relationship with the mother, she may be perceived as unstable, restless, making the child feel as if its security might be disrupted at any moment. Later on, there's trouble with settling into a relationship comfortably, as either the individual is afraid that the relationship could just end suddenly, or the individual feels very unsure about being in the relationship as they might get bored or distracted. They usually prefer to stay autonomous so that they don't have to rely on the love of others because love feels inconsistent and uncertain to them. The mother herself may have had ambivalent feelings about motherhood, perhaps seeing it as an obstacle to her freedom and independence, which, let's be honest, it is. Their behavior is often willful, their moods change at a moment's whim. They can be touchy, and as the moon represents what we are sensitive to, they may be very sensitive to perceived slights and to rejection. Moreover, they need to have the freedom to change at any moment, especially emotionally and domestically. They love to rebel, to break away from the past, and they love shocking people. With the easy aspects, this individual is merely mildly unconventional and eccentric, maybe even exciting, and their mother may have been simply progressive, independent, whimsy. Perhaps she was a single mother who found this arrangement agreeable to her nature. They are usually a good friend as they are quite understanding of different changing moods and emotions of their friends, making them tolerant and accepting of quirks. They like plenty of change, stimulation, and can be quite humanitarian, often enjoying a large host of friends of varying ages, cultures, backgrounds, and ideas. Moon Neptune aspects. Things are about to get fragmented. This is a sensitive, impressionable placement. There is an air of confusion and nebulousness about the people with this aspect. Their boundaries are weak and they are unsure where they end and where other people begin. Very talented at feeling feelings, but not so talented at recognizing and defining them. Moreover, they are very receptive to the suffering in the world, leading to them feeling like they need to be rescued or that they need to be rescuing others. They have insane amounts of compassion and empathy, and they are prone to idealizing and yearning to merge, whether with the cosmos, the mother, the past, or the ideal home, a home that would be emotionally tranquil, beautiful, safe, and comfortable. Furthermore, imaginative abilities are present, as well as a soft, shy, and retiring nature. In terms of the mother child relationship, the mother was probably viewed as lacking boundaries herself. Her identity not sufficiently formed, she seemed to fuse emotionally with those around her. On the bright side, though, she was also probably quite empathetic, imaginative, maybe even artistic. Perhaps she couldn't bear loneliness, which may have allowed her to be victimized because of her fear of being alone. The themes of sacrifice, suffering, and feelings of powerlessness may be associated with this individual's childhood. Moreover, the child could have been looked to for redemption by the mother, leading to an unconscious state of fusion between mother and child, where both of them played the role of the victim. The child may have been undermined through guilt and suffocated by this fusion, as if the mother was asking the child to sacrifice its freedom for her needs. And thus, a pattern is set up. In relationships, the individual will be looking for this enmeshment, this fusion with another, which will inevitably lead to losing themselves. As I've mentioned, there is usually a boundary problem, so it is important to develop better boundaries in the day to day life, because a nasty feature of this aspect is emotional blackmail. For the Neptunian, there isn't really an I in a relationship, there is only a we. But effacing oneself for the sake of fusion tends to generate a lot of resentment, especially since there are many planets in the chart that have no intention of fusing. Learning to say no sometimes is of great help. One discovers that one hasn't died afterwards. Moreover, the more confidence we develop in a relationship's capacity to encompass boundaries, not just fusion, the more we heal the Neptunian wounds of guilt and resentment around the mother. Another issue is a great need for escapism, whether that would be just escapism from daily responsibilities, escapism into interests, or escapism into substance abuse. It's because they are a bit too gentle for this harsh world. Nonetheless, boundaries and limits are important to set, even for oneself. Okay, so on to our last planetary aspect, Moon Pluto. For those with the Moon Pluto aspect, the emotional and feeling realm is usually very intense. They need close connection and deep involvement, but they are also likely to feel intruded upon, thus leading them to need withdrawal and retreat from such intensity often too. They usually act as a sponge for any negative, unexpressed, or buried feelings that are around them. Their emotional life isn't peaceful. It is dark, crisis prone, primal, and often gets swept up by their unconscious urges. Moreover, there is likelihood for emotional power struggles in relationships and in the home. They are known for trying to kill their feelings in their urge to get rid of them, but they never do. They are simply buried and ready to resurface and erupt, usually at the worst possible time. They want to purge themselves of poisonous and destructive feelings of which they have an abundance of, such as vengefulness, jealousy, pain. But the key lies in not purging, but bringing them to the surface to be accepted and transformed into their more positive manifestations. Their childhood was at times characterized by crisis and trauma, and they can sometimes act as a thorn in the flesh of the rest of the family, somehow reminding them of the skeletons they keep in their closet. These people then, in adulthood, are capable of smelling trauma from quite a distance. Oftentimes, though, they can become experts in this field. They are strong, perceptive, insightful, and people in crisis can turn to them because nothing seems to shock them, as they have experienced the darker side of humanity firsthand in their childhood, in their emotional depths, in their very own subconscious. They are also known for being private, but they do tend to invade other people's feelings, thoughts, and intentions as they are very distrustful of other people's motives, often quite paranoid too. Furthermore, they are sensitive to the misuse of power and have the ability to bring secrets into the light, making this an ideal placement for a therapist. Life is usually not peaceful for them, but their world is vivid and intense, so they can squeeze out a lot from the day to day life. The mother could have been seen as overprotective, controlling, devouring, manipulative, but usually in covert ways. The child usually felt intruded upon first by their mother, as she was seen as not allowing their child a hiding place, no sense of privacy. On the other hand, the home was also the place where it wasn't safe to expose one's feelings. The child usually picked up on their mother's darker or hidden feelings, some frustration or rage she was hiding, so it felt threatened by her as if she could destroy it. Therefore, in later life, they can repeat this pattern by gravitating towards partners with a broody nature and destructive urges, which the individual can unknowingly trigger, leading them to equate love with danger, trouble, and emotional warfare. They can't relax in relationships, as their abandonment wounds whisper to them that their partner can at any point become mean, betray them, and abandon them. Thus, they turn devious, controlling, and manipulative as a means of preventing their worst fears from happening. Unfortunately, love and hate often go hand in hand for their close relationships. But the best relationships are those that can maintain the negative emotions along with the positive. As the Moon Pluto individuals are intense, they thrive on the intensity, drama, and intrigue in relationships, no matter how much they deny that to be true. They equate intimacy with transformation, through which one is torn down and rebuilt all over again. Intensity of emotion has this effect, because its force will burn through whatever conscious rules were made between two people, and then suffering follows in its steps. Displacement is thus very passionate, and the roots of the word passion, unsurprisingly in this context, mean to suffer. So, on a final note, for those who might be asking, what if the moon is unaspected? When the moon is unaspected, it is uncolored by any other planet. It will thus act in very pure archetypal ways. It usually screams for attention among all the other planetary relationships. The individual usually doesn't recognize it in their behavior, but to others it is an unmistakable thorn that is visible right away. In practice, it can result in one of two ways. Either one is very disconnected from their emotions, or they are hypersensitive to everything and their emotional nature is very unintegrated, making them emotionally immature, for instance. In terms of the mother relationship, it will usually be a deeply unconscious one, where there is not much emotional communication. Maybe she just didn't have much maternal feeling, maybe she had left the child and the child never really knew its mother. Whatever the case, the sign and house placement in this case will be incredibly important to gain clues on the expression of the moon. And that's about it for today. I hope you learned something new here. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, the list for recommended readings and my sources are in the description down below. Like the video if you liked it, comment if you'd like to share any of your thoughts, and consider subscribing if you'd like to continue learning about astrology with me. Bye!